Good morning, this is David Benson with Cornhusker Hybrids in Lincoln, Nebraska, where our mantra and trademark is, success starts with the seed. No truer words have ever been spoken in this business. Today we're going to talk about tolerance versus resistance in products and in breeding for products. It's not the same thing. Now I'm also going to break down tolerance versus resistance to get a two-part series out of this: abiotic stress tolerance and biotic stress tolerance, and they are different things, okay? Abiotic is non-living, like the environment. Biotic is living, like a disease organism or an insect. So today we're going to talk about abiotic tolerance breeding, and I'm going to talk about the type of tolerances that I have to work with in my business or in where I live in the Corn Belt of the United States in maize, which is my primary crop that I'm going to talk about. You people working in other crops in other countries just got to kind of extrapolate the ideas to your situation. But essentially, as far as abiotic stresses go, where I'm sitting in Nebraska, in the central U.S. Corn Belt, the western Corn Belt, a semi-arid area where we have irrigation, raise tremendous yields. The biggest abiotic stresses we have to deal with are drought tolerance, which is the number one breeding target and the number one factor in any field, anywhere, anytime in the world for any crop. Drought tolerance and being able to tolerate drought for some extent is important in every crop, everywhere. That's one. The other one is what we call brittle snap or green snap, which is where the corn plant the stalk is broken by a wind event below the primary ear, and then thus, once that stalk is broken, the yield on that plant is zero. And this is a tremendous problem in Nebraska, where we're sitting on the east side of the Rocky Mountains, and those storms come up from the west, go over the top of the mountains, and by the time they hit the plains of Nebraska, they can be going anywhere from 80 to 180 miles an hour, and we will have some kind of wind event and 80 to 100 miles an hour, and corn broke somewhere in Nebraska every year. So it's a big deal. Both of these are abiotic stresses. Both of these, there is genetic variability in the material, but there is no actual 100% resistance, okay? There is no such thing as drought resistance. A corn plant has to have water. It cannot make it without water. And also in maize, if you don't know, like some plants, it has a tipping point at the V15R1 stage where if you don't get water to that plant that it needs while it's trying to reproduce itself, it will either be barren or very few kernels will set, depending on the situation. So either of these traits, they're abiotic traits that I have to deal with, that we have to be able to tolerate these traits in our germplasm that we sell for market. So we have to be able to breed for these too. So there is genetic components, there's genetic variabilities in both of these. For drought tolerance, you can use managed stress environments where you can physically withhold the water, you can control the water, the timing of the water, and you can learn a lot about your breeding materials, and you can select based on how they respond to different water regimens that are very similar to your target environments. You can also work with, we do a lot with flex ear maize, which just is kind of an adapt and overcome source of germplasm where it flexes to meet the needs of the environment. It decides, how it operates in a kind of a plastic elastic rubber band situation where it flexes. So in both of these traits, tremendously influenced by the environment, which is unpredictable from year to year, but yet you still have to bring hot products to the market that'll tolerate these, even if you may not see them for 1 year or 5 years. So they can be called sleeper traits from that end. But in brittle snap, you can develop an assay. We developed one where we snap the plants to try to simulate what a wind event does. I know people that have created big fans and put them in the field, mobile, to try to blow the plants over like the wind does. Excuse me. But either one of these, again, we're talking about tolerance here. There is no absolute resistance. There is no continuum running from absolutely susceptible to absolutely resistant, which you might find we'll talk about later in biotic traits. So, kind of close things out, when you're working with abiotic traits, which almost every breeder in the world is, and the number one most people are going to work with is drought tolerance. You need to develop yourself an assay. You need to manage stress environments. And you also need to grow your hybrids in a series of environments that you think that are likely to be stressful, and measure how they perform in that stress. And we want the hybrids that'll tolerate the stress the best, but will still respond and yield the most if the conditions get better. So that's where your selection for drought tolerance differs than it does, say, from brittle snap. And brittle snap, I'll call it green snap, and a lot of people in the world don't have to worry about this, but I do. It's a big deal, and I know other people do too. And you'll have other crops where you have wind really causes you problems. So you got to develop assays. You have to develop tolerance, and we can develop assays. We can classify germplasm. We can test across environments. We can make sure we include some of these stressful environments. We got really good statistics, so we know how they perform in these stressful environments and how they form overall. But when you're going to breed for tolerance, you don't select the one. If you got an 18 bushel yield in a field that's that low and it yields 27 bushel and think that's the greatest hybrid ever, you need to have that in a situation where your yields reduce 20% and you see which ones are the best. Because that's the most likely scenario. Even where I live, there's only like 1 year out of every 25 where we might lose a crop to drought, the total crop. And this happened probably in 2012. So it's something to think about. But have locations that are representative of your target market where you're going to sell, where the drought tolerance is a factor, and make sure you select those genotypes that are kind of elastic or rubber band flex response. And in drought tolerance, you can do a lot of work with flex ear maize, with managing ear population, plant populations, and seeing the difference. With a trait like brittle snap, our thing is we need to identify the parents that are the better parents and cross good by good. It's pretty simple. Good by good is good by bad is unknown, and bad by bad is bad. We need to work with those good genotypes. We need to make sure our germplasm has some of those genes in the gene pool, and we go about it that way. So at the end of the day, though, when you breed for tolerance, and particularly I'm talking about abiotic here, or you're buying hybrids that'll tolerate, we've really created a sort of, I hadn't really thought about this before, but elastic or rubber band flex response in these genotypes and hybrids that they can perform across a range of environments, and that's what you really need. You don't want to settle on just one. You don't want a hybrid that works in just one. So that's the way I close today. I'd say that it's a great day in plant breeding, and that success starts with the seed. Make sure you're working with your dealer to buy the best seed you can.